So this morning, I got out of the shower and I was like, dry. Unbelievable. It's no longer my fault when the drain is clogged. So this week, we're in the fourth part of a series called Throwbacks. Really what we're doing is looking at these really old stories, some of the most well-documented stories in all of human history. They are thousands of years old, and what's amazing is that they have so much to say to us right now in our lives in 2022. They're stories from what we call the Old Testament, which is really the history of ancient Israel. And what we said is that they give us a picture. They show us what it looks like to trust God. Or if you're someone who's not there, maybe you don't want to be here right now, and you definitely would not say that you trust God, it gives us a picture of what it could look like to trust God. And so we're looking at these stories, these throwback classic stories about ancient Israel. So I'll tell you a little story of my own. Surprise. My brother, he was here last week. Some of you might have had the chance to meet him. Really nice guy, younger brother. He's 5 years younger than me. He is my little brother, but he's bigger than me, which is unfortunate. So he's like my big little brother. But he's like a golden retriever, He's just, and I mean that in the most respectful way possible. He's, friendly. He doesn't really get flustered. He's just super cool, going with the flow. But he has this streak in him that's really protective, like the family dog. And so when he was in high school, and even in college, he was a lifeguard. He just really finds joy in helping people. And really for as long as I can remember, he wanted to be a police officer growing up. He wanted to be somebody who was out on the streets helping people. And so he got out of college and he started looking for a job, and it just wasn't going well. He couldn't find a job anywhere up and down the East Coast. It seemed like every precinct that he got involved with, it just didn't end up working out. And he was getting frustrated. And I remember one night, I was at the beach with a bunch of people from the church that I used to work at on the North Shore, Three Village Church. And there was a guy there who was well into his 80s, and he used to work for Suffolk County. He was the inspector. His name's Dan. This guy well into his 80s, and I see him, and I'm like, ooh, maybe he could hook us up, Maybe he can help my brother Nick out a little bit. So I go up to him, I'm like, Dan, here's my brother's story, He's always wanted to do this. I'm just really trying to, lay it on thick. And he looks at me, and he's like, it doesn't work like that anymore. There's nothing really I can do. But then he looks at me with like 80 years of conviction and says, but you tell your brother, don't lose faith. And then he didn't say anything else. And I'm like, maybe do you have somebody's number? And it just ended there. Have you ever felt like with some people, faith, it just works? They reach for their faith hat and they're good. Life can be crazy, but they've got faith. Maybe their circumstances aren't perfect, but they're cool. They got faith. They're cool, calm, and collected. And it's like, how did you get there? Maybe you've tried that before and it just hasn't worked. I know I have tried that. There have been times in my life where I've reached for my faith and it's like there's nothing there. I really want something to go a certain way. I really am hoping this is going to happen. I'm like, faith, trying, and it doesn't work out. And it's like, why? Why for some people does faith seem to just work? And for me, and maybe for you, there are times where it's like, it's not, I'm not getting out of it what they're getting out of it. Someone tells me to just have faith, and it doesn't just happen. And so what's the difference? What's the difference? I'll tell you right now. The secret to faith that works and faith that doesn't. The secret to being able to trust God, maybe you've never heard it this way, is knowing when you should and when you shouldn't trust God. Maybe that's an interesting way to say it, or a different way of saying it, but that really is what it comes down to. And the story that we're looking at today is totally going to clear that up for us. So faith could be something to hold on to, not something that you hope is going to happen. Today, we're looking at a story. It's one of those obscure stories. You've probably never heard of it before. It's the story of David and Goliath. And it's a picture of what faith looks like against the odds. The odds are against you. Now, a lot of us in here, I'm sure, have heard the concept of David and Goliath. But if you don't know the actual story, it's a story in the history of ancient Israel. David came way before Jesus, and Jesus was actually from the line of David. He was one of his descendants. And David came from a big family. He had a lot of siblings. Anybody have a lot of siblings? Anybody? I just met a family of 5 girls. God bless them, right? So David came from a family with a lot of siblings. He was the youngest one. And because he was the youngest one, a lot of times he ended up doing the dirty work at home. He was the smallest one. He had the least intimidating, vibe, I guess. And so in the ancient world, in the days of constant battle and conquest, when they had to go out, when the Israelite army had to go out, David stayed back and he helped at home. He helped his dad, Jesse. Now, during that time, the Israelites had these neighbors called the Philistines. And these people were like the bad guys. They were like the bully, down the block that's always trying to take your lunch money or kick over your sandcastle, right? They just were always causing problems for the ancient Jewish people, the Israelite people. Constantly. So, one time, they go out to battle. David stays back, and this time it's a different format. It's not everybody against everybody. It's one-on-one. It's our best against their best. And that's where we meet this Philistine named Goliath. Now, Goliath is just huge. He's like Wilt Chamberlain, right? And then some. If you don't know who that is, basketball player. Big guy. Shaquille O'Neal? Okay. He's big. Andre the Giant? Anybody still? All right. He's huge. He's bigger than me. Big guy. And so he comes out and he every day issues this challenge. Like, let's go. One-on-one, give me your best guy. If we win, you guys are our subjects. But if you win, we'll be your subjects. And so here's this Israelite army, and they're just shaking in their boots. And if you think about it, they really don't have many options because they don't have a 9-footer on their team. This guy is out there, he's huge, he's covered in armor, he's so intense, he's got someone just to carry his armor, and he's taunting them day after day after day. And so now they've got to decide, are we just gonna surrender and just say like, fine, you can have us all? Or are we gonna let one guy go out there and get creamed and then surrender, right? Either way, it's not looking good for them. They have almost no options, and so they're just like waiting out the clock. Every day, this guy comes out, he taunts them, and no one steps up. So one day, Jesse, who's David's dad, is like, all right, David, go check on your brothers, let me know how things are going. He goes and takes a trip. And he gets there and he hears Goliath come out and do his daily taunt. And he runs back to the camp, runs back to all the Israelites who are afraid. And he's like, what the heck, guys? Like, who does this guy think he is that he's gonna defy the armies of the living God? If you're with us the past couple weeks, you might remember like Israelites, they saw themselves as God's people. The whole world was gonna know about who God is, how good he was, and how strong he was based on what was happening through those people. And so David is like, are you kidding me? He's going to defy us. No one's got an issue with this. And in like typical older brother fashion, I say this as an older brother, one of his older brothers looks at him and basically says, okay, David, shut your mouth and go back to your sheep. Like, who do you think you are coming here and telling us what to do? We're out on the battlefield. And so David says, okay, I'll go. And he addresses the king named Saul. And Saul challenges him, and he's like, you look at you. What are you going to do against this guy? And David says something really powerful, and you have to remember this if you want to understand the story. He says, the Lord who rescued me, remember he was a shepherd, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of the Philistines. The paw of the lion, the paw of the bear. It's like, I'll take care of it. And so Saul says, okay, fine, go. He even gives him his armor, like the king's armor, to go out and wear, and David doesn't like it. He doesn't like the way it feels. It's like my son getting dressed every morning. He doesn't like the way his outfit feels. And so he takes it off and he just goes out there. So here he is on the battlefield, and they have this exchange. In the ancient world with war, there's a lot of trash talk, and it's recorded. Their little conversation, a lot of build up for this argument. David walks out there, no armor. He's got a sling, a couple stones. He walks out there, and Goliath, the giant, sees him. And he says this to David. He says, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks, with your shepherd's stuff? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. He says, come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David comes back. It's a little kid, little scrawny little kid. He comes back, and he said to the Philistine, not Goliath, the Philistine. And he said, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, all your fancy stuff, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. That part wasn't necessary. He goes on. He says, this very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. And then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. It says, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord, and he will give all of you into our hands. And the battle starts, right? David picks up his rock, some stones, throws the stone, hits Goliath in the head. Goliath goes down. David kills him. End of the fight. A lot of buildup. Really wasn't a very exciting fight, It's like when I was younger, like really young, I remember going to my uncle's house for a boxing match. It was pay-per-view, when you had to order it and call, Mike Tyson against some guys. First boxing match I ever watched. There's all this build-up, all these fights beforehand. It was like, when's that guy going on, the Mike Tyson guy? And finally, it was the fight happened. The bell rang. He walked out. He punched the guy once. The guy went down. Over. You're like, what a waste. That's boxing? I don't like boxing, That was it. All this buildup, all of this, 40 days, bing, ding, hits the guy in the forehead, and the battle is over. And so, David and Goliath, there's a story, right? We love David and Goliath. We love that story. It's become a phrase now. We label things. Oh, it's a David and Goliath matchup, right? March Madness. Any March Madness fans in here? Basketball? No. One. Thank you. It's basketball, the playoffs, college basketball. The tournament is on every year in March, unless there's a pandemic. And the best games for me Like, I can't watch them all because there's a million, but my favorite ones are the beginning ones when the top plays the bottom. The David and Goliath matchup. The 1 plays the 16. It's the best. It's exciting. We love the underdog story. And so it's natural to read the story and go, okay, we do this without even realizing it. In every story we hear, we're like, where am I? All right, I'm David, cool, And there's a giant, all right, there's no 9-footer in my life, but I've got some challenges, and so I'm gonna trust God to handle the giants in my life. Against the odds, faith against the odds. When I was in school, I played football, and it wasn't very good, but I was like fast-ish. And so I could just run away from the guys that were bigger than me, which was everybody. And I just ran on fear. And I remember one day there was this drill at practice we were doing. I don't even know if you're allowed to do this drill anymore. But 2 guys, it was one-on-one. The whole team would watch. They would make like a little runway. One guy would lay down on his back like this. The other one would lay down on his back. One guy would have the ball, and the other guy was on defense. The coach would blow the whistle, and you would both get up, turn, and one guy would try and run past the other, and the other guy would try to not let him go through. And so it was basically just head-on collision. And one day in practice, the coach usually set me up with the other scrawny guy, but one day he set me up with one of my good friends. His name is Mitch Singer. And everyone's like, oh, it's Lou and Mitch. They're such good friends. There must be arch rivals. No, we were not arch rivals. There was no contest. Everybody knew he was 1,000 times better than me. Had about 10 inches on me. He's pure muscle, just a machine, right? And it's me against him. And I get on the ground, and I'm like, this is my giant, right? This is the guy, like, today, no more. I'm tired of being trampled. I'm going to take him down. I didn't call it the David and Goliath, but that's how I felt. Like, this is my moment. And I'm on the ground. I am like so pumped. The whistle blows. I get up, and with everything I have, I hit this guy. And I remember feeling like my body had never so quickly completely changed direction. And he flattened me. I'm serious. Everything, I remember being on the ground, everything was tingling, right? It's probably why I can't remember anybody's names. And it was just brutal. And I'm sitting there like, what the heck? Right? Like, why? Seriously, why does it work for David, but it doesn't work for me? Was I supposed to throw a rock at him? Did I not trust God? And then really, this does happen in the world of sports where it's like we were trying, but maybe for you it's happened in real life where there's something you want, there's something you're trusting God for, and against the odds, you're trusting him to come through, and he doesn't. Like, maybe there's a job and it doesn't seem like you have a chance, but I'm trusting God for it, right? That's the language we'll use, and you don't get it. Or maybe there's somebody sick and you're trusting God for a healing, and you don't get it. Or there's a house, or there's a future, or there's an income, or there's a relationship, or there's something you want against the odds. And it feels like a giant, and you're trusting God for it, and he doesn't come through. Well, then what? Then who failed? Was it me? Like, maybe I'm not David. I mean, maybe God really likes David. That's David from David and Goliath. Okay, maybe he's got like special access. Or maybe I didn't pray right. Or maybe, why doesn't my faith work? Or maybe eventually you just come to the conclusion where you're like, this isn't real. This is maybe an inspirational story, and it's something we can label a nice, matchup in March in the NCAA tournament, but it's not real. You can actually hold on to this. How come some people can trust God and some people can't? It works for some, but not others. The secret is knowing when you should and when you shouldn't trust God. Or think about it like this. Imagine I told you I was trusting my parents to buy me a car. And I was waiting. And for the record, they have in the past. But let's say I want another one. And I'm waiting. I'm trusting. I'm waiting. I'm trusting. And they don't come through. And I'm upset. And you come up to me, you're like, why are you upset? I'm like, I was trusting my parents were going to buy me a car. They didn't. You might ask some questions. Eventually, you'd come to the point where you'd ask, well, when did they say they were going to get you a car? And if I said, they didn't, but I saw it and I'm trusting them for it. It's illogical. Sometimes we trust God to deliver on promises that he didn't make. You know, David, the problem really is the way we read this story. When we read it, it's once upon a time there's a boy named David, but that's not how the story starts. And if you read any of the stories from the Old Testament, from the history of Israel, and something doesn't seem quite right, you should step back and ask, is that the whole story? Because it never is. It's it's always part of a bigger picture that will help you understand it better. And here you only have to back up a few chapters to meet someone named Samuel. At that time, they didn't have like a nice leather-bound Bible that they could just read. And so they had people that spoke with authority on behalf of God. And you know what Samuel said to these people back then? He said this. He said, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, they had spent some time in serious like anti-God mode. And rid yourselves of the foreign gods, the Baals that they were worshiping, and the Ashtoreths, which is like a female version of that. And commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only. He's speaking to those people, right? Here's what will happen. Ready, ancient Israelite people? Ready? Samuel says, he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. That's a very clear if-then statement. And you know what happened? You know how they responded? It says, so the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. And so you know what the then is on that promise? You will be delivered from the hand of the Philistines. Do you remember what David said to Saul? He said, the God who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. In fact, David stops using the name Goliath in the story and just refers to him as a Philistine, because what he's doing is referencing a promise that God had made to them. And so the story is not once upon a time there's a boy named David. It's once upon a time God made a promise to certain people in a certain place at a certain time. And a little boy named David held on to that with everything he had, against the odds when no one else would, when he couldn't see a way out. And he trusted it. And he believed that God keeps his promises. He believed that God keeps his promises. And so you can trust God to keep his promises. Always. Always. But you shouldn't trust God to keep promises he never made. Like where we get into trouble is where we look at something we want and we trust God for it. And maybe that's not what God wants for you. And maybe he never promised to give you that job. He didn't promise that he was going to heal him. He didn't promise that you were going to get the house. And so what we're doing is like as if God is a cosmic vending machine, and we're like, all right, I see that, bing, bing, and now I get it if I trust him enough. And that's where faith falls apart. That's where we look at David's story and we're like, that's just phony inspiration. There's nothing there. No, there is something there you can hold on to if you know what God has promised. That's the secret to all of this. David was given a specific promise and he held on to it against the odds when no one else did and when he had no idea how God was going to pull it off. And you can too, if you know what God has promised. God has not promised the people of Community Church in the Long Island area that we will defeat the Philistines. If a 9-foot-tall Philistine came in here, I would run. And you should too. And so I hear that, I'm like, okay, well, that stinks, I like risks. I like to put myself, I like the idea of trusting God. So does this story just give us nothing? I would argue it gives us a lot more than that. A lot more than a vending machine, which is not really faith. That's an attempt for control. What we can trust is that there is a God who cares more about us than we could possibly imagine. And the promises that he makes to us are the same kinds of promises you would make to children that you love. Sometimes kids come up to me and they ask for things can we have, and I'm like, I can't promise you that, but I can promise you this. I can't promise you I'm gonna give you, because they don't know, they can't see the whole picture. They don't know how it all works out. And if I gave them everything they wanted, their worlds would fall apart pretty quickly. And so last week, we talked about how Paul, who was speaking not to ancient Israel, but to followers of Jesus, like us, a long time ago, but very much like us, who said God works all things together, even the broken things, even the messes you made, even the things people have ruined, and he can use them for good. And so when your life is falling apart in front of you, when you're going through something that is unfathomably difficult, you can hold on to the promise that God is going to do something good. Maybe it's something good out here, maybe it's something good in here, but I can hold on to it. And when you're going through the difficulty and the pain of it and trying to think of something good coming out of it, it can feel like a 9-foot-tall giant standing in front of you. But that's the kind of promise you can run at, even if no one else is. Even if you don't understand how it's gonna work out. Even if it's against the odds. We talked about the Apostle Paul wrote to a church, an ancient church, and said, don't grow weary in doing good. Because there will be a time when you reap a harvest, when you see the benefit, when it seems worth it if you don't quit. And so that's a promise. When you're I'm done, I'm just done being the guy or the girl that's always trying to do it's not working, what's the point? No, that's a promise you can hold on to, that there will be a time where you'll look back and see that something came from that. When you're living with guilt, feeling like God hates you or maybe just doesn't like you, there is a promise that Jesus gave everything for us. And because of that, we can know how much he loves us. And we don't have to carry that guilt. That's something you can hold on to. When you have made a mess for yourself, when there's a mistake that you feel like has totally train wrecked your life, there's a promise that there is a God who cares enough about you and is powerful enough to take good out of the mess that you have made. And that's something you can hold on to. And looking at the worst decision of your entire life, right in front of you, and thinking one day good will come from this, will feel like looking at a 9-foot-tall giant. But we need to know what's a promise and what's not if we want to have real faith. Later on, the Apostle Paul, we've talked a lot about him here. He was a follower of Jesus, and he explained to a church in Rome who was pretty distant from all the action that was happening with Jesus in Jerusalem. And he explained what Jesus' death on the cross meant to these new followers of Jesus. And he explained how it was an expression of love for people. Him going through that was him saying, this is how far I will go for you. And from that point, literally for thousands of years, there have been followers of Jesus changing the world because they remembered how far Jesus would go for them and came to the conclusion that I may not know what he's doing, how he's doing it, why I'm going through this, but that guy, I can trust him. Our faith, real faith, is not trust in an outcome. It's trust in a person. which is why we've been spending so much time talking about what God is like. Because you need to know what someone is like to trust them. We don't trust what we don't know. And so we can put our faith in someone who wants everything for us, who would stop at nothing to win our hearts. And so, okay, for me, I'm like a dreamer. I'm a risk taker. I like the idea of fighting a giant. That's exciting to me. And so, do we never do that? Do we never try to defy the odds? Do we run away from challenges? I would argue, no, we don't. Because there is a promise that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to the power that's working within us. And with that, you can go out and do hard things and try hard things and try to make a difference and know that even if you fail, there is a promise that God will take that failure and use it for good. That's a good reason to take risks. But if you fail, your faith doesn't fall apart because you felt like I was trusting God for the promise and he didn't give me what I wanted. If he never promised that you were going to succeed at whatever thing you went after. It is so important that we know what God has actually promised and what he hasn't. That's the secret. And the liberating thing about that is that it's not about, does God like us? Am I like David? Did I say the right words? Because it's about what he said. It's not faith in faith or faith in our ability to have faith. It's faith in what he said, faith in a person, not an outcome. That's the difference. The secret is knowing when you can trust God, when he has promised something. You can take that to the bank against the odds when no one else does, and when you can't figure out how he's possibly going to pull it off. I'm going to ask the band to come up here and then we'll wrap up. I mentioned Dan in the beginning, the guy who's really high up in Suffolk County, who gave me the advice for my brother to not lose faith. And at the time, I told my brother, okay, this guy, he said, don't lose faith, in case we haven't talked about that, okay, whatever. And what was interesting was that my brother, he went for a while longer, not finding a job, doing what he wanted to do. Eventually, he was studying air traffic control for a little while, and things didn't seem to work out. But eventually he ended up getting a job in the White House. He was working for the Secret Service. And then, after doing that for a few years, he felt like it wasn't a good fit for him, so he left and became a police officer somewhere else. And was able to do what he wanted to do. But you know what I think is amazing? That guy Dan, who told us to never lose faith, even though things may have ended up working out pretty well for my brother's job situation. His challenge to us to not lose faith, to not stop trusting God, he wasn't telling us to trust God that he would get the job that he wanted. He was telling us to trust that my brother's story was never out of the hands of a God who loves him. And so what is that going to look like? Well, we don't know and we never will. But the thing that gives us peace, the thing we can hold on to, the promise that we can charge our giants with, that you can charge your giants with, is that there is a God who went to the cross for you, who's in your corner, who cares for you like you care for your own children if you have children. And we can trust him and the promises that he's made.